Welcome to a quiet night of ghostly tales. As the world slows down, we'll drift through haunted places and restless spirits, carried softly by stories meant to guide you into sleep. Do you believe ghosts are echoes of the past, or something still watching us now? Let me know your thoughts, and together, let's step into the whispers of the unknown. Tonight, our journey begins with one of the most famous and chilling spirits in Latin American folklore. She is known by many names across different lands, but almost everyone recognizes her cries. The weeping woman, La Llorona, drifts through the night wrapped in sorrow, her voice carrying across rivers and fields. Some say her wails are a warning, others believe they are a curse. What unites them all is the haunting sadness in her endless cry, the sound of grief that has not rested for centuries. The story often begins with a woman of striking beauty. In many versions she is poor, though her beauty catches the attention of a wealthy or noble man. They fall into a love that feels like it should defy the barriers of class and fate. For a time, happiness blooms, children are born, and the woman feels that she has found her place in the world. But as in many tragic tales, the man grows distant. He abandons her, sometimes for a woman of higher status, sometimes simply vanishing and leaving her behind. Her heart is broken, but what comes next is even darker. Overwhelmed by grief and despair, she wanders to the river with her children. In some tellings, it is an act of madness, her sorrow twisting into rage. In others, it is the heavy shadow of hopelessness pressing her down until she cannot see a way forward. In those quiet, terrible moments by the flowing water, she makes a choice that cannot be undone. She drowns her children, their cries vanishing beneath the surface of the river, swallowed by the current. The instant the waters close, the reality of what she has done strikes her like a thunderclap. She collapses, wailing, clawing at the riverbank, calling their names, though she knows they will not answer. Her grief is so deep that it consumes her completely. Some say she dies right there, her body lying broken by the river. Others tell that she wanders the land until death finally claims her. Yet in either telling, the end is not the end, because even in death she cannot rest. Her soul is cursed to wander, to search endlessly for the children she lost. Dressed in white, her long dark hair flowing, she is seen moving along riverbanks and streams, her voice rising in chilling cries that carry for miles. La Llorona's weeping pierces the night, sounding both near and far, as though she exists between worlds. Those who hear her say the sound can freeze your blood, an echo of sorrow so heavy it presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Children are warned not to wander near rivers at night, for she might mistake them for her lost sons and daughters. Travelers are told not to follow the sound of her voice, because those who draw near sometimes never return. There are tales of men who encountered her along lonely roads. She appeared as a beautiful woman at first, her face hidden in a veil. When they drew closer, she lifted her head, revealing eyes hollow with grief and a face twisted in anguish. By then, it was too late to escape. Her legend is not just a single story, but a living tale that shifts with every telling. In some villages, she is a betrayed woman who seeks vengeance on unfaithful men. In others, she is more like a spirit of justice, punishing those who harm children. But most often, she is remembered as a mother trapped by her own sorrow, condemned to search forever. And no matter which version is told, the sound of her crying remains the center of the tale, a cry that is both terrifying and heartbreaking, a cry that bridges the living and the dead. As you picture her wandering by the riverside, imagine the stillness of the night. The water moves gently, silvered by the moonlight, while the trees stand silent along the banks. Then from the shadows, a sound begins to rise. A woman's voice, faint at first, then louder. It is not just sound, but feeling, a voice heavy with despair, breaking with pain. You cannot help but shiver, even if you only hear it in your imagination. That is the power of La Llorona's legend. The power of La Llorona's story comes not only from her sorrow, but also from the way her presence lingers in the imagination of every community that tells her tale. People grow up hearing her story whispered by parents and grandparents, often around fires or in the safety of home. The telling is both a warning and a comfort. The warning lies in the lesson. Stay close to family. Do not wander into danger. Beware of the consequences of reckless choices. The comfort comes from knowing you are not alone in hearing her cries. Whole generations have passed down the same chilling echoes. Many describe her as tall and thin, her face hidden by a veil, her dress always white. But some versions give her bloodshot eyes and hands that tremble as she reaches out, as though she still hopes to hold her children again. Others say her gown drips with river water, heavy and trailing behind her as she moves. No matter the details, the image always stays the same. A woman bound by grief, her form blurred by shadow and moonlight, her sobs carried on the night wind. In Mexican folklore, she is deeply tied to water. Rivers, streams, and lakes are her dwelling places, almost as if the water remembers what happened and calls her spirit back to the scene of her crime. People tell of seeing her figure by bridges, her gown trailing across the surface of the water without sinking. Sometimes she is heard crying from the distance, yet when witnesses look around, they realize the sound is all around them, with no clear source. It is this unearthly quality, this sense that she exists both near and far at once, that keeps her story alive. There are countless personal accounts from those who claim to have heard her. Some describe a long, mournful wail that rises and falls like the tide. Others hear her calling softly, as though whispering the names of her children. A chilling detail repeated in many stories is that if her voice sounds close, she may actually be far away. But if it sounds distant, she may be standing right beside you. The uncertainty, the way these senses cannot be trusted, makes her presence even more unsettling. La Llorona's legend has also been used as a way for parents to protect their children. Much like other cultural stories meant to keep young ones safe, her tale is told to warn against playing near rivers at night or straying too far from home. Children are told that if they disobey, La Llorona might appear, mistaking them for her lost children, and drag them away into the water. This has given her a role that is both terrifying and protective. A spirit who frightens children, but in doing so keeps them safe from real dangers of the night. Though many details change, the core of the story always remains grief and punishment. Some say she is not cursed by God or any higher power, but by her own guilt, forced to relive her mistake over and over. Others say she was punished by divine judgment, her fate sealed as a warning to all, and in certain versions, she is not entirely malicious. Some witnesses claim that hearing her wail foretold tragedy or death within their family, almost like a warning rather than an attack. In this way, she resembles spirits from other cultures who cry not out of vengeance, but as messengers of fate. Even today, her cries are reported in both rural and urban areas. People driving late at night on lonely roads sometimes swear they hear a woman weeping in the distance, only to find no one there when they stop. Farmers have spoken of hearing her voice drift over the fields, and families living near rivers tell of strange wails on nights when the moon is bright. For some, it is only superstition, but for others it is a reality that cannot be explained away. Her legend moves like water itself, changing shape depending on where it flows, yet always recognizable. She is both a ghost and an idea, the sound of human sorrow that will not fade. Whether you see her as a cautionary tale, a restless spirit, or a symbol of grief, La Llorona's voice still carries through the night, reminding us of the thin veil between the living and the dead. When you sit with La Llorona's story long enough, you begin to notice how deeply it touches on themes that reach beyond the surface of a ghost tale. At its heart, her legend is about loss, regret, and the way emotions can linger long after a life has ended. In this way, she is not only a ghost, but a mirror. Through her wails, people hear echoes of their own griefs and mistakes, the kind of memories that keep us awake at night when everything else is silent. The question of why she still roams unsettles many who tell her tale. Is she cursed by the heavens, doomed to suffer for eternity as punishment for drowning her children? Or is she trapped by her own guilt, unable to forgive herself, reliving her sorrow night after night? The difference matters because one version paints her as a villain, while the other shows her as a victim of her own despair. And perhaps that duality is part of what makes her story so enduring. She is both frightening and sympathetic, someone we fear, but also someone we pity. In some regions, she is not described as a spirit who harms, but as one who warns. A family might hear her wail in the middle of the night, and soon after, sickness or tragedy might strike. She becomes an omen of death, her sorrow reaching out to touch the living before they even realize what is coming. In this way, she resembles other weeping spirits from around the world, who act as heralds of fate rather than agents of violence. Yet in other accounts, she does more than cry. People whisper of her dragging travelers into rivers, of her spirit latching onto those who draw too close, their bodies found later by the water's edge. These stories remind listeners that sorrow can be just as dangerous as anger. The grief left unchecked can consume everything around it. Her voice is perhaps the most terrifying detail because it refuses to obey the natural rules of sound. Imagine standing by a darkened path at night, the river flowing somewhere nearby. The air is still, the only sound your own breath. Then you hear her cry. At first it is faint, like a whisper carried on the wind. It grows louder until it seems to circle around you, too close to ignore. And then you realize that the sound is playing tricks. What seemed far away now feels like it is right behind you, or what seemed near suddenly echoes from the distance. You cannot trust your senses. All you can do is listen as her voice pours sorrow into the night and hope that it fades instead of drawing closer. Children especially are woven into her story. Parents across generations have told their little ones about La Llorona as a way of keeping them safe. Water at night is dangerous, especially in rural communities where rivers run deep and unseen currents can pull the unwary under. Telling a child that a ghost waits by the riverbank, searching for new souls to take, ensures that the warning is remembered long after bedtime stories are over. In this way, the legend has protected countless children from real dangers, even if it frightened them in the process. Yet the tale is not only about safety. For adults, La Llorona also speaks to the dangers of betrayal, abandonment, and the heavy consequences of choices made in desperation. Some versions of the legend portray her not as a woman driven mad by grief, but as one betrayed by the man she loved. His abandonment leaves her broken, and her terrible act is seen as a response to that pain. In these versions, her ghost becomes a symbol of betrayal itself, the living embodiment of wounds that never heal. She lingers to remind all who hear her that love, when twisted into cruelty, can leave scars that reach beyond life. Communities also use her legend as a way to connect with the unseen. The wails of La Llorona are more than just a sound of grief. They are also a reminder that the boundary between the living and the dead is not unbreakable. Her cries drift across that threshold, calling out to both worlds, reminding us that sorrow is not bound by time. This is why people say her voice chills them to the bone. It is not just that it is sad. It is that it feels unnatural, a sound that belongs to another world but finds its way into ours. Her story has survived for centuries, moving from village to city, whispered in kitchens and classrooms, sung in ballads, and later retold in films and books. It changes, but it never disappears. That persistence reveals something about the story's power. It is not only the ghost of one woman, but a collective ghost, a shared piece of grief that entire cultures carry. Every time she is told anew, she becomes alive again, her cry echoing across rivers, across lands, across time itself. And so when night falls and the wind carries a sound you cannot place, when a river seems to ripple without reason, the thought of La Llorona lingers. Perhaps she is still searching, her voice carried farther than anyone can imagine, hoping to find what she lost long ago. Or perhaps her cry is not only hers, but all of ours, the sound of human sorrow that can never fully fade. Legends like La Llorona endure not only because of the fear they inspire, but because of the way they resonate with the most universal of human emotions. Grief, love, betrayal, guilt, and longing are not bound by culture or time. Everyone has known sorrow in some form, and everyone has felt the weight of regret. When people hear her wails, whether in imagination or in stories passed down, they recognize that emotion. It is the sound of a heart breaking over and over again, unable to heal. In many places, La Llorona is not told as a distant myth, but as something very close. Entire towns have stories of sightings, each one personal and particular. A fisherman may claim to have heard her voice drifting across the water before a storm swallowed his boat. A traveler may recall seeing her by a roadside canal, her figure lit faintly by moonlight, only to vanish the moment headlights reached her. Families who live near rivers will sometimes speak of hearing her late at night, a voice so filled with despair that even hardened adults feel their skin rise in goosebumps. For each person who encounters her, the legend becomes alive again, stitched into daily life. There is also the striking detail that her story often changes depending on who tells it. In one household, she is a cruel spirit who steals children away. In another, she is a broken mother who deserves pity. This flexibility allows the tale to adapt and survive. It can teach lessons to children, offer warnings to adults, or serve as a symbol of cultural memory. And through each version, the core image remains unchanged, a woman in white, bound to water, crying for the children she cannot find. Folklorists often point out that La Llorona may be far older than the colonial tales suggest. Some trace her back to pre-Hispanic times, connecting her to Aztec stories of women spirits who wept before a catastrophe struck. According to certain accounts, even before the Spanish arrived, there were legends of a woman crying out for her lost children, her voice interpreted as an omen of the great changes to come. If this is true, then La Llorona is not only a ghost of a single story, but a spirit who has carried her wail across centuries of upheaval. She embodies not just personal grief, but the sorrow of entire peoples. The persistence of her tale also reveals something about the way people experience fear. Unlike monsters or demons that attack with claws and fire, La Llorona's power lies in her sorrow. Fear of her is not only fear of being harmed, but fear of being drawn into her sadness, of becoming part of her endless search. This is what makes her so haunting. She does not merely scare, she unsettles, pulling listeners into the weight of her mourning. When you hear about her, you do not simply think of death. You think of loss, of what it would feel like to lose everything you love and wander the earth forever with nothing left but regret. Even in modern times, La Llorona finds her way into new stories. Urban legends in cities speak of her cries heard near drainage canals, echoing through empty streets late at night. Drivers recount picking up a woman dressed in white, silent until she suddenly disappears from the car, leaving behind only a faint sound of weeping. In rural areas, she still lingers by riversides, her voice mixing with the rush of water and the calls of night animals. And in every telling, no matter how new or how old, people are reminded that grief has a way of haunting us all. Her presence in modern culture, through films, songs, and ghost stories shared on the internet, only makes her stronger as a figure of the night. Yet even as she becomes part of popular horror, she never loses the sorrow at her core. Audiences may be drawn to her for a scare, but what they take away is always the same: the sound of a mother's endless cry. La Llorona's legend is more than just a ghost story. It is a river of memory, flowing through generations, shaping itself to the people who tell it. Like water, it can be calm and reflective, or violent and overwhelming. And like water, it always finds a way to return. She is as present now as she was centuries ago, her cries reminding us that some wounds do not fade, some sorrows do not heal, and some voices refuse to be silenced. So the next time you hear the wind outside your window late at night, imagine it carrying with it the faintest trace of a woman's wail. Perhaps it is nothing more than the breeze, or perhaps it is her voice, drifting farther than any river, farther than any land, still searching, still calling, still wandering the endless night. And with that, the legend of La Llorona rests at the center of countless ghostly tales. She is a spirit of grief, of punishment, of warning, and of sorrow. But above all, she is unforgettable. Her cry is not bound to one village or one river, but to the heart of anyone who has ever known loss. This is why she endures. This is why she will always be heard. Across the wide landscapes of Latin America, from the mountains of Guatemala to the rivers of Venezuela and the deserts of the American Southwest, the cry of La Llorona changes shape but never disappears. She is a spirit who travels with the people, a voice carried in migration, settlement, and memory. Wherever communities settle near water, her tale takes root, and the sound of her wail becomes part of the night. In Mexico, she is the most familiar, her story tied to rivers that run through villages and cities alike. Her cry is often said to rise along the banks after midnight, a mournful echo that sends shivers even to those who grew up hearing about her all their lives. But Mexico's La Llorona is only the beginning. In each country, she adapts, taking on local shades and new layers of meaning, as if grief itself wears different masks depending on where it travels. In Guatemala, the weeping woman is known in many small towns, often near rivers that cut through valleys. Here she is remembered not just as a spirit of sorrow, but as a dangerous warning. Children are told that if they wander too far into the jungle at night, or if they play by the riverside when the moon is high, La Llorona will appear and mistake them for her own children. Some elders describe hearing her voice roll across the mountains, echoing like a bird call carried on the wind. For them, her presence is not only frightening, but tied to the land itself, as though the valleys remember her cries and release them again each night. In Venezuela, she shifts yet again. There, La Llorona is not always seen as purely malicious. Some describe her as a wandering soul trapped between this world and the next, forever searching for forgiveness. She is both feared and pitied. Families in rural areas share stories of hearing her cries when someone in the community is near death, her wail a herald of tragedy. Others claim she appears in dreams, her figure half hidden, whispering warnings that protect those who listen. In these tellings, her sorrow is not only destructive, but also strangely protective, a reminder that even in the depths of grief, a mother's love lingers. Travel north, and the story drifts into the deserts and rivers of the American Southwest, carried by immigrants who brought the legend with them. In New Mexico and Texas, her cry is said to echo along dry riverbeds, even when no water runs through them. Drivers on long stretches of desert highway whisper of a pale woman appearing at the roadside, vanishing when they stop to offer help. Families living near the Rio Grande pass down her story in the same breath as other local spirits, showing how folklore from across borders blends seamlessly into new lands. For these communities, La Llorona is not just a story of the past, but a ghost who has followed them into the present, reminding them that grief knows no borders. What is remarkable is how her image remains recognizable even as the details change. She is always a woman in white, always weeping, always tied to water. Yet the emotions people attach to her shift. To some, she is a threat, stealing children away. To others, she is a restless ghost whose cries are omens of danger. And to a few, she is a mother whose sorrow inspires compassion rather than fear. This fluidity allows her to exist everywhere at once, in every community that whispers her name, carrying the weight of both terror and tenderness. As night falls in these places, the story of La Llorona blends into the natural world. In Guatemala, the cry might mingle with the calls of nocturnal birds. In Venezuela, it might drift with the wind across wide plains. In New Mexico, it might echo against canyon walls, distorted into something otherworldly. People pause, listening, unsure if what they hear is real or imagination. That is the genius of the legend. It does not require proof. The fear comes from possibility, from the thought that maybe, just maybe, her wail is rising right outside your door. When people speak of ghostly encounters in Latin America, one story seems to linger in nearly every town, every village, and every quiet riverside. It is the tale of La Llorona. Generations have whispered her name. Parents have warned their children about her wails, and travelers claim to have heard her cries while passing through desolate roads at night. Some describe her as a woman in a flowing white gown, her face veiled by a sheet of mist. Others insist they have seen her eyes burning with grief, endlessly searching the riverbanks for children she lost long ago. The legend shifts, depending on where you are. In Mexico, she is a mother who drowned her children in a fit of despair or rage, only to realize the horror of what she had done. In Guatemala and Colombia, her cries are tied to rivers and lakes, as if water itself carries her sorrow across the continent. In some rural villages, her presence is seen as a warning. If you hear her weeping nearby, danger might be close. If her cries sound faint and far away, it is said she is right behind you. What makes La Llorona so enduring is not only the terror she inspires, but the way her story adapts to each community. For some, she is a restless spirit of punishment. For others, she is a symbol of collective grief, embodying centuries of hardship, loss, and resilience that Latin America has endured. Her legend has spread far beyond its origins, even appearing in films, songs, and plays. Yet despite the many versions, the heart of her story remains the same. A cry that pierces the night, reminding listeners of sorrow too deep to ever rest. But La Llorona is not the only phantom who walks the lands of Latin America. From the Andes to the Pampas, spirits of wanderers and restless souls have been sighted for centuries. In Chile, there's talk of the Caluch, a ghostly ship that sails the waters of Chiloe Island. Fishermen claim it appears only on foggy nights, glowing faintly on the horizon, vanishing if pursued. According to legend, it is crewed by drowned sailors who were given a second life. Some say they live in eternal celebration aboard the ship, dancing and feasting as the waves crash below. Others whisper that to see the Caluch is a curse, as it means your own fate may soon be tied to the sea. These ghostly tales often intertwine with the natural world in Latin America. Unlike haunted houses in Europe or battlefields in North America, many of the spirits here seem bound to rivers, mountains, forests, and seas. It is as though the landscape itself holds memory, echoing the lives of those who came before. The Amazon rainforest, for instance, has countless stories of spectral guardians. Indigenous groups speak of ancestral spirits who protect sacred places, appearing as glowing figures in the night, or shape-shifting animals that vanish when approached. Explorers who entered the jungle often reported hearing voices, laughter, or songs carried on the wind, though no village was nearby. In the mountains of Peru, locals tell of the Pistaco, a spectral figure resembling a gaunt man with hollow eyes. He wanders lonely paths at night, searching for victims. Some believe he is a colonial ghost, a reminder of the traumas inflicted by outsiders, transformed into a creature who preys on the living. While terrifying, the Pistaco also reflects cultural memory, a way communities preserve their fears and histories through supernatural stories. Even cities echo with hauntings. In Bogota, Colombia, the San Francisco Church is said to harbor restless monks whose shadows glide across the walls long after dark. In Mexico City, a metropolis layered with centuries of history, ghostly sightings are almost expected. From Aztec warriors wandering the ruins of Tlatelolco to Spanish nuns seen drifting across old convent courtyards. The city seems alive with echoes of its past. And then there is the haunted convent of Cusco, where travelers claim to hear chanting at night, though the halls are empty. In many ways, Latin America's ghost stories act like a bridge. They link generations, reminding the living of tragedies that must not be forgotten, and of spirits that continue to walk beside them. What binds all of these legends together is the sense that the past is never far away. The cries of La Llorona, the glowing sails of the Caluchi, the whispers of the Pistaco, each one is a reminder that the dead still have a place among the living. Unlike stories that lock ghosts inside old houses or castles, these spirits roam freely, woven into rivers, seas, mountains, and cities. They belong to the land itself, and as long as the land endures, so too will the tales. In many small towns across Latin America, ghost stories are not distant legends, but part of daily life. They are told not just around campfires or on stormy nights, but during family gatherings, woven into conversations as naturally as talking about the weather. An elder might pause before a story, lowering their voice, and the younger ones lean in closer, listening for the details. These tales are not simply meant to scare, but to warn, to preserve memory, and to keep the connection between past and present alive. One particularly haunting figure is El Sombreron, a mysterious man often described as wearing a giant black hat, his eyes hidden in shadow. In Guatemala, his legend is deeply rooted in local folklore. He is said to appear at night, sometimes leading a black horse or strumming a guitar that hypnotizes those who hear it. Young women are especially warned of him, as he is believed to braid their hair in the night or cast spells that leave them restless and sleepless. Some say he is a trickster, others call him a demon, But all agree that once El Sombreron sets his sights on you, escaping him is no simple task. Ghostly horsemen appear in other tales as well. In Argentina and Uruguay, there are stories of spectral gauchos, lone riders who wander the pampas. Their figures are glimpsed at dusk, silhouetted against the horizon, vanishing before anyone can draw near. Some locals believe they are fallen warriors who cannot let go of their earthly duties, condemned to ride forever in search of home. To see one is said to bring both awe and dread, a reminder of how thin the veil between life and death can be in such vast, lonely landscapes. What is remarkable about many of these legends is how they reflect the values and fears of the cultures that carry them. In Central America, spirits often guard rivers and caves, places vital to community survival. In the Andes, the mountains themselves are alive with presence. Many believe that every peak, or apu, houses its own spirit. Offerings are still made today to keep these mountain guardians at peace. Yet in the quiet hours of the night, travelers crossing the high passes tell of hearing footsteps behind them, or voices carried on the wind as though the apis send their messengers to watch over or to warn. Even in coastal regions, the sea seems unwilling to release its dead. Along the shores of Venezuela, fishermen tell of La Llorona, a woman who appears at night to men who are unfaithful. She is said to be beautiful at first glance, with flowing black hair and radiant features. But if the man draws closer, her form twists into something terrifying, revealing claws and fangs as she attacks. In this way, La Llorona is both a ghost story and a moral tale, her vengeance serving as a reminder of the consequences of betrayal. In Brazil, the forests are said to shelter spirits that blur the line between folklore and the supernatural. One of these is the curupira, a guardian of the woods with bright red hair and feet that face backward. Hunters who disrespect the forest often find themselves lost, wandering in circles, chased by the eerie laughter of the curupira. Though not always considered a ghost in the traditional sense, his presence carries the same feeling, a force from beyond, reminding the living of boundaries they should not cross. Urban legends thrive in Latin America as well, particularly in modern cities where centuries of history overlap. In Havana, Cuba, the Malecon seawall is said to be haunted by drowned lovers who appear as fleeting silhouettes against the crashing waves. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, old Spanish forts carry tales of soldiers who still march the walls at night, their muskets in hand, as if guarding the coast long after their time has passed. And in Buenos Aires, Argentina, the famed Recoleta Cemetery is filled with mausoleums so elaborate they resemble tiny palaces. It is there, among the marble angels and wrought iron gates, that visitors claim to see figures drifting between tombs, vanishing when approached. Some even say that Eva Perón's tomb has its own spectral guardians, though others insist her memory alone is enough to stir the imagination. Ghostly children also appear often in Latin American lore, adding another layer of sorrow to these stories. In some towns of Peru and Ecuador, locals speak of hearing the laughter of children in abandoned schools or orphanages, though no one is inside. Travelers resting along rural roads sometimes report a small child approaching to ask for help, only for the figure to dissolve into mist once a hand is offered. These encounters are among the most unsettling, as they mix innocence with tragedy, leaving those who witness them unsure whether to feel fear or compassion. What makes these stories so captivating is how they seem to belong to both the supernatural and the everyday. For many communities, ghosts are not an abstract idea, but a living presence, something that must be respected. Families still light candles for the dead, not only during Dia de los Muertos, but throughout the year, believing that to neglect remembrance is to invite restlessness. Cemeteries are visited not just for mourning, but for conversation, as if speaking to the departed keeps them close. The blend of Catholic tradition with indigenous and African beliefs also shapes the way spirits are understood across Latin America. Saints, ancestors, and ghosts often coexist in the same narratives, their roles overlapping in ways that are deeply meaningful to the cultures that hold them. A spirit might be feared in one story, yet honored in another, depending on how it chooses to appear. These echoes across the continent remind us of something profound. The living and the dead are not separate worlds here, but intertwined. The cry of La Llorona, the song of El Sombrerón, the glow of the calucha on the horizon. They are all part of a tapestry that refuses to let the past fade away. And as long as these stories are told, the voices of the dead will continue to walk beside the living. Among the most striking things about these legends is how they travel. A story whispered by a grandmother in a small Mexican village can find its way across borders, carried by families who move in search of work, love, or safety. When they arrive in new lands, they bring with them their memories and their warnings, reshaping ghostly figures to fit new surroundings. This is why, in the American Southwest, so many communities still speak of La Llorona. Along the Rio Grande, parents warn their children not to wander too close to the water at night. Travelers say they have heard her cries carried on the wind, a chilling sound that makes even the most rational person glance over their shoulder. In Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, the story often merges with local histories. Some versions say La Llorona was once a native woman, wronged by a Spanish settler, her tragedy symbolizing the pain of colonization. Others place her in the frontier days, forever tied to rivers where pioneers once struggled to survive. No matter the detail, the essence remains the same: a grieving mother, her voice a lament that never ends. What makes these American versions fascinating is how they blend cultures. Indigenous traditions, Spanish folklore, and the realities of life on the border all weave together, forming a story that feels both ancient and immediate. For many families, telling the tale is not about whether it is true or false, but about honoring the shared fear and awe it inspires. Beyond La Llorona, echoes of other Latin American spirits have also found new homes. Stories of the Ciguapa from the Dominican Republic, mysterious women with backward-facing feet who lure men astray, are told by immigrants in New York and Miami, their details shifting slightly with each retelling. The Ciguapa may once have wandered mountain paths, but in the city she is said to walk along lonely streets, her strange footprints appearing in places where no one else has passed. In Los Angeles, where cultures collide and folklore thrives, tales of the Caluche ghost ship are retold in Spanish-speaking communities. Though far from the coast of Chile, people describe seeing phantom lights offshore or hearing the distant sound of music carried over the waves at night. It is as if the Caluche has followed its people north, unwilling to release them from its spectral embrace. Each retelling, each migration of a ghost, proves something remarkable about the endurance of folklore. These spirits are not bound to one location. They follow the living, shifting, and reshaping with time, yet always retaining their essence. La Llorona may weep beside a Mexican river, but she can just as easily haunt the canals of Albuquerque or the arroyos of El Paso. The universality of her grief makes her story adaptable, recognizable wherever sorrow has touched a community. What unites these tales across borders is the deep sense of warning they carry. Many weeping women, spirits, whether La Llorona or her counterparts, serve as protectors of sacred places. They stand at the edges of rivers, forests, or roads, guarding boundaries that humans cross too carelessly. To encounter them is often to be reminded of humility. of the need to respect forces beyond our understanding. Yet there is also tenderness woven into these fears. Communities keep these stories alive, not just to frighten, but to give shape to feelings too large to express otherwise. Grief, loss, betrayal, longing. All of these find their voices in the cries of the weeping women. By sharing the stories, families acknowledge that these emotions are part of life, something every generation must face. In many ways, these spirits become companions through hardship. When families lost loved ones to war, migration, or natural disaster, the presence of a ghostly figure gave a form to their sorrow. To hear La Llorona's cries in the distance was to know that grief had a sound, that others had felt the same pain, that no one was truly alone in their suffering. This is why these legends remain so powerful, even in modern times. In bustling cities where technology rules daily life, people still tell stories of ghosts by rivers and forests. Taxi drivers in Mexico City swap tales of passengers who vanish before reaching their destination. Students in Bogota whisper about hearing footsteps in old university halls. In Puerto Rico, locals say the winds sometimes carry voices from storms long past, as if the island itself remembers every loss it has endured. Each of these echoes across Latin America reminds us of the shared thread that binds all human experience. Whether through La Llorona's eternal sorrow, the vengeance of La Sayona, the protection of the Curupira, or the restless wandering of ghostly children, these stories all reflect the same truth. Life and death are not separate realms, but neighboring rooms whose doors open more easily than we might like to believe. And so, as these tales continue to cross rivers, mountains, and oceans, they grow ever more alive. La Llorona may be the most famous, but she is far from alone. She walks beside countless other weeping women, spectral guardians, and restless souls, their voices rising together into a chorus that spans the continent. It is a chorus of sorrow, of warning, and of memory, reminding us that wherever people live, love, and lose, there too will the spirits linger. The echoes of Latin America are not fading. They are alive in every whispered story, every warning told to a child, every candle lit for the dead. They are part of the land, part of the rivers and forests, part of the very breath of the people. And when night falls, when silence deepens, their presence can be felt most clearly, waiting for anyone willing to listen. When we hear the cries of La Llorona in these stories, it is easy to think of them only as frightening sounds meant to send chills down the spine. But beneath the ghostly voice, there are layers of meaning that go beyond the supernatural. The weeping woman is more than just a restless spirit. She is a mirror, reflecting grief, betrayal, and longing. Her presence in the night sky speaks to something deeply human, something all of us understand, even if we have never walked the banks of her rivers. Many believe La Llorona's tale began as a cautionary story, a way to keep children safe. Parents told their little ones to stay away from rivers, warning them that if they wandered too far, the weeping woman would claim them. In this way, she became a protector, even though she is portrayed as terrifying. Her cries are not only of sorrow, but of warning, a reminder of the dangers of the natural world. Just as a mother watches over her children, the figure of La Llorona hovers at the edge of water, ensuring that the living respected the boundaries of life and death. But the deeper we listen, the more her story begins to shift. To some, La Llorona is a victim, not a villain. She is a woman undone by betrayal, abandoned by the man she loved, left in despair so great that it consumed her. Her wandering spirit then becomes a symbol of heartbreak that could not be healed, of wounds that echo long after life has ended. Her cries are the cries of anyone who has been left behind, of anyone who has ever lost something they could not bear to lose. In this way, La Llorona is not only a ghost story, but also an emotional truth told in the shape of myth. Every culture has figures like her because grief is not bound to one place. Her endless search for her children, her constant wandering through the night, represents the feeling of being unable to move on, of being trapped in a moment of sorrow that refuses to fade. Some historians suggest that La Llorona also reflects the weight of colonial history. In this interpretation, she is more than one woman. She becomes a symbol of the suffering endured by entire peoples during the Spanish conquest. The betrayal she experiences echoes the betrayal felt by indigenous communities who were torn apart, their families broken, their lands lost. In this view, her voice is the voice of the conquered, crying out not only for her children, but for generations of lives uprooted by violence and change. It is not unusual to hear versions of the story where La Llorona is connected to La Malinche, the Nahua woman who served as translator and companion to Hernán Cortés during the conquest of Mexico. La Malinche's legacy is filled with contradiction. Some see her as a betrayer, others as a survivor with no choice in her fate. Linking her to La Llorona turns the ghostly cries into echoes of history itself, mourning the pain of an entire nation. When told this way, the story transforms from a personal tragedy into a collective memory, one that carries the voice of countless women silenced by the past. But even beyond history, La Llorona speaks to something that exists within every human heart. To hear her cries is to confront the feeling of loss we try so hard to bury. Perhaps that is why she is so enduring, why her story has lasted through centuries and spread across continents. People hear her and feel a shiver, but also a strange recognition, as if part of themselves is caught in her wail. The weeping woman is a paradox. She is frightening yet sympathetic, cursed yet protective, monstrous yet deeply human. Her figure embodies the dual nature of grief itself, painful to confront, but impossible to ignore. When she appears by riversides, her presence feels both like a danger and like a reminder that sorrow is part of life. This balance between fear and compassion may be why she survives in so many different versions. Some storytellers emphasize her cruelty, describing her as a spirit who drags the living to their doom. Others soften her story, painting her as a lost mother searching endlessly for her children, her cries filled with longing rather than malice. Both versions speak to truths we carry, that grief can destroy, but also that grief comes from love, and love never fully disappears. As we continue to explore her meaning, it becomes clear that La Llorona is not just a story to be told, but a lens through which we can understand ourselves. She embodies the shadows we all carry, the emotions we cannot always speak aloud. In her haunting voice, we hear not only her pain, but our own, reflected back to us in the stillness of the night. As her story passes from generation to generation, La Llorona becomes more than a single ghost wandering the banks of rivers. She becomes a symbol that adapts to the needs of the people who tell her tale. To a child, she is a frightening reminder to stay safe, to avoid dangerous waters or dark places. To an adult, her story can take on heavier meaning, echoing betrayal, heartbreak, and guilt. She shifts depending on who is listening, which is why she never loses her place in the collective imagination. In many ways, La Llorona is a teacher of boundaries. She marks the places where one should not tread too carelessly, the edges of rivers at night, the empty roads where danger might wait, the liminal spaces between life and death. Ghost stories often serve this role in human culture, using the supernatural as a warning sign. But with La Llorona, the warning carries a deeper note. It reminds us that human emotions themselves, grief, rage, despair, can become just as dangerous as the wild landscapes around us. The image of her weeping, endlessly searching, is also a reflection of what happens when sorrow has no outlet. Many psychologists and storytellers alike have seen her as a representation of unresolved grief. When a person cannot find peace, when the loss becomes too heavy, it can consume them. La Llorona's eternal wandering is the embodiment of the cycle. She shows us what it means to be stuck in the past, unable to release pain, unable to move forward. In this way, she is both a cautionary tale and a vessel of empathy, showing us the weight of emotions carried too long. Some storytellers describe her not as a punisher, but as a guide. Her presence near rivers is seen as a signal to respect the water, to understand that it holds both life and death. Rivers in many cultures are thresholds, places where the world of the living and the world of the dead come close together. La Llorona, standing at these banks, becomes a guardian of that threshold. She warns people not to take lightly the forces that flow around them. The sound of her cries drifting over water is not only terrifying, but sacred, as though she herself has become a voice of nature. The layers of her meaning also lie in how she straddles the line between guilt and innocence. If we believe the version of the tale where she drowned her children, she is a figure of horror, someone who committed an unforgivable act. But even then, her endless punishment suggests she suffers far more than she caused. She becomes a prisoner of her guilt, doomed to wander forever in search of what she destroyed. In this way, she represents the idea that guilt can outlast even death, binding a soul to the earth in chains of sorrow. Other versions soften this image, making her a victim of tragedy. In some retellings, her children were taken from her, swept away by floodwaters or stolen by others. In these tellings, she is not guilty at all, but still cursed to mourn forever. This duality, whether she is guilty or innocent, keeps her story alive. People argue about her nature, yet they all agree on one thing. Her sorrow is endless, and it cannot be silenced. The symbol of the weeping woman also touches on ideas of motherhood and expectation. In many societies, mothers are seen as protectors, as figures of sacrifice and devotion. When a mother is portrayed as failing in that role, whether by choice, by mistake, or by tragedy, it carries immense weight. La Llorona embodies this fear of failed motherhood, of what happens when love and care collapse into loss and despair. She is at once the ideal of devotion, wandering endlessly for her children, and the warning of what happens when the sacred bond between mother and child is broken. This might explain why her figure is so unsettling. To see her is not just to encounter a ghost, but to be confronted with the deepest bonds of family, twisted by grief. Her story resonates across cultures because it speaks to the universal fear of losing what we love most. Whether her cries are heard in Mexico, the United States, or further abroad, listeners recognize in her wail the voice of every parent who has known loss. La Llorona's presence also raises questions about justice. Is her punishment fair? Should she wander forever for what she has done? Or is her suffering too great already? These questions mirror the human struggle to understand fate, morality, and forgiveness. Her story is a reminder that in life, justice is not always clear, and in death, the search for peace can last forever. Through all these layers, cautionary tale, symbol of grief, embodiment of guilt, voice of history, La Llorona continues to endure because she speaks to the human heart. She tells us that love and sorrow are inseparable, that grief does not fade easily, and that the voices of the past remain with us if we dare to listen. As the legend is told and retold, the weeping woman becomes a vessel for emotions and fears too vast to hold in silence. In her voice, people hear not only her personal sorrow, but the grief of entire communities. When disasters strike, when families are torn apart by war or hardship, her cries gain new resonance. It is as though she mourns alongside the living, carrying a collective sadness that cannot always be spoken aloud. This is part of why she is remembered with such vivid detail. To describe her is to describe grief itself. Some say her hair is long and tangled, like the threads of sorrow that cannot be combed straight. Others say her dress is pure white, forever damp with river water, a reminder that she is bound to the place of her greatest loss. Her eyes, red from endless tears, reflect the torment of a soul caught between worlds. In every description, her appearance tells the story of someone consumed by emotions that time could not heal. There is also an archetypal quality to La Llorona. Across cultures, figures of mourning women appear, always tied to death, loss, or fate. Her story seems to embody the universal recognition that women's voices, especially those shaped by sorrow, carry immense power. The image of a woman crying in the night strikes something deep within the human imagination. It is a sound that pierces the quiet, impossible to ignore, filled with both vulnerability and strength. Some interpretations suggest that her cries are not only for her own children, but for all children, for all innocence lost. She becomes a kind of mother figure for humanity itself, her grief echoing whenever lives are cut short, whether by accident, violence, or time. In this sense, she is not only tied to one river or one village, but to the universal experience of loss. Her voice can be imagined anywhere, from the banks of the Amazon to the streets of a modern city. Wherever sorrow exists, so too does the possibility of hearing her lament. There is also a spiritual element to her presence. Many people view La Llorona not simply as a ghost, but as a restless soul caught in the cycle of suffering. In some traditions, restless spirits are believed to remain in the world because they cannot accept their fate, or because they have unfinished business. For La Llorona, this unfinished business is her endless search. She cannot find her children, and so she cannot find peace. The lesson here is profound. When we cannot let go of the past, when we cling too tightly to what is lost, we too become restless, trapped in cycles that keep us from moving forward. The tragedy of her endless wandering also touches on themes of redemption. Is there any way for La Llorona to be freed from her fate? Could she ever find forgiveness, or is her sorrow destined to last until the end of time? These questions do not have clear answers, but they invite reflection. They remind us of our own struggles with forgiveness, both of others and of ourselves. Perhaps the reason she remains so haunting is that she represents the part of us that wonders whether some mistakes can ever be healed. Her story also serves as a reminder of the dual nature of love. To love deeply is to risk deep sorrow. La Llorona's tragedy springs from love. Her love for her children, her love for the man who betrayed her, and her inability to bear the loss of both. Love is what makes her human, but it is also what binds her to her eternal suffering. This paradox is part of why she endures. She is both a warning about the dangers of unchecked emotion and a testament to how powerful love truly is. In communities where her story is told, La Llorona is not just a ghost to be feared, but also a figure that inspires empathy. Many listeners cannot help but feel sorrow for her, even as they shiver at the thought of her cry. They imagine her walking the riverbanks, forever searching, and they see not a monster, but a soul who cannot find rest. In this empathy lies her greatest power. Unlike other spirits who are purely frightening, La Llorona touches something tender in those who hear her story. She reminds us that even in fear, compassion is possible. This complexity is what allows her tale to continue across generations. If she were only a monster, her story might fade. If she were only a victim, she might be forgotten. But she is both, and more. She is fear, sorrow, love, and warning all at once. In her cries, people hear 1,000 meanings, each one shifting depending on who listens. It is this shifting nature that makes La Llorona not just a ghost, but a symbol. She belongs to folklore, but she also belongs to the human heart. When we speak of her, we speak of ourselves, our griefs, our mistakes, our longing for forgiveness, and our endless hope that love endures even through the darkest of nights. In this way, La Llorona is more than just a ghost story meant to frighten children into obedience. She becomes a cultural mirror, showing the values, fears, and hopes of the people who tell her tale. Every scream she utters is a warning about choices that cannot be undone. Every tear she sheds is a reflection of the suffering of those left behind. Through her, listeners learn about the destructive weight of unchecked emotions, the dangers of betrayal, and the deep scars that loss can leave on a community. Another way to view her is through the lens of gender. For centuries, societies across the world have told stories of women who lost control, whose emotions overwhelmed them, and who became dangerous because of it. La Llorona is often painted in this light, the mother whose grief transforms into horror. But some scholars and storytellers challenge this interpretation, suggesting instead that she represents not weakness, but endurance. Though she wanders endlessly, she never ceases her search, carrying her sorrow into eternity. In this view, her persistence makes her less a monster and more a reminder of the strength found in survival, even if that survival is steeped in tragedy. This perspective ties into the ways La Llorona has been adapted in modern culture. Films, plays, and songs portray her not only as a terrifying wraith, but also as a sympathetic figure. Some versions even depict her as a victim herself, driven to despair by abandonment or abuse before her fatal decision. In these retellings, the haunting becomes a critique of injustice, a way to acknowledge how often women throughout history have borne unbearable burdens in silence. Her ghost, then, is not only punishment, but testimony. She bears witness to the pain that might otherwise be forgotten. The psychological side of her legend is equally powerful. To hear her story is to confront the darkest corners of human emotion. Anger, jealousy, heartbreak, and guilt are feelings that every person may encounter, though rarely in such extreme forms. La Llorona embodies the fear of losing control to these emotions. She is a warning that the line between grief and destruction can be razor thin, and yet she also embodies the universal experience of regret. Who among us has not wished to undo a choice, to turn back the clock just a little? Her endless lament is that very wish magnified and eternalized, echoing through every river she haunts. When we step back and look at the legend's endurance, we see that part of her power lies in her adaptability. In some households, she is a terrifying lesson, told to keep children safe from danger. In others, she is a story of heartbreak, used to spark empathy and reflection. And in academic circles, she is a symbol of colonial history, tied to the fusion and conflict of European and indigenous cultures. She can be both monster and martyr, villain and victim. This fluidity allows her to continue resonating across time and place. Even her cry, the wailing that chills listeners to the bone, carries layers of meaning. On the surface, it signals danger, a spectral warning to stay away. But at the same time, it is also an expression of unending grief, a release of pain that cannot be contained. That sound alone captures the heart of the story. It is both frightening and heartbreaking, both alien and deeply human. Perhaps this is why so many people who claim to have heard her cry describe not only fear, but also sadness. It is as though, in hearing her voice, they are confronted with sorrow too great to ignore. And so the meaning behind the weeping woman becomes less about her individual tale and more about what she stirs in those who listen. She reflects guilt, loss, memory, survival, and the shared human struggle to carry pain. Whether she is a warning against moral failure, a symbol of female endurance, or a spirit shaped by history itself, she continues to speak to us. Her legend refuses to die because the emotions it touches are timeless. Wherever there is grief too heavy to bear, La Llorona will find a place to wander. As we drift from this reflection, we can begin to notice how her figure connects to other spirits across the world. Her voice is not alone. In the distance, echoes of other weeping women can be heard, in the cries of banshees, in ghostly mothers from different cultures, each carrying their own tale of loss and warning. In the next part of our journey, we'll begin to follow those echoes, tracing how the legend of La Llorona is not confined to one land, but resonates across continents, binding cultures together through shared stories of grief and the supernatural. Across oceans and distant lands, there is a curious echo that links La Llorona to other spirits of sorrow. While she walks the rivers and lakes of Latin America, her lament finds kin in Ireland, Scotland, and beyond. In those misty landscapes, a figure known as the banshee wails in the night, her voice rising like the wind through stone valleys and ancient fields. Though the settings are worlds apart, the feeling they inspire is hauntingly similar. A cry in the dark that brings both dread and recognition, as if grief itself can travel without boundaries. The banshee is one of the most famous weeping spirits in folklore. Her name comes from the old Irish words for woman of the fairy mound. Unlike La Llorona, she does not always appear because of her own suffering, but rather as a messenger of death. To hear her keening cry was said to foretell that someone in the family would soon pass away. Sometimes she was described as a pale, veiled woman, combing her hair with a silver comb. Other times she appeared as an old crone, her face lined with sorrow and age. Always, though, she carried that unmistakable sound, a cry that pierced the night and rattled the heart. What makes her so fascinating is how her lament was not considered evil. In fact, some believed the banshee was an ancestral spirit, mourning the coming death out of compassion rather than cruelty. She was feared, yes, but also respected. Her wailing was not a punishment, but a solemn announcement that the circle of life was about to close. This sets her apart from La Llorona, who is often portrayed as a restless ghost, punishing the living or searching endlessly for her lost children. Yet when you place their stories side by side, you can feel the shared thread of sorrow that binds them. Both are women whose cries become supernatural warnings. Both are voices that cannot be ignored. When you think about it, this connection is powerful. It suggests that across cultures, people have long imagined grief taking shape as a sound in the night. Whether it is the cry of La Llorona or the keening of a banshee, both legends remind us that sorrow leaves an imprint too heavy to stay silent. The living interpret that sound as something beyond the ordinary, a message from another world, or perhaps from deep within ourselves. Other weeping spirits appear in different cultures too, adding depth to this haunting pattern. In Japan, there are tales of onryo, vengeful women who suffered betrayal or heartbreak in life and returned as ghosts, bound by sorrow. Their cries can paralyze those who hear them, carrying both rage, and grief. In the Philippines, there are stories of the White Lady, a ghostly woman in white who lingers on lonely roads, sometimes weeping as she appears before travelers. These figures, like La Llorona and the banshee, are women whose voices pierce the veil between the living and the dead. Even in Native American traditions, there are spirits tied to water and lament. Some tribes speak of ghostly women who dwell by rivers, warning those who wander too close. These stories, while unique in detail, resonate with the same theme, that grief and danger often walk hand in hand, and that a woman's sorrow can echo far beyond her own lifetime. The parallels make you wonder, why is it so often a woman who carries this role in folklore? Perhaps it is because women, as mothers and daughters, have long been seen as keepers of family, of memory, of continuity. Their cries, then, represent the breaking of those bonds, a wound so deep that it resonates across generations. When a man appears as a ghost, he is often a warrior, a guard, a figure of anger or unfinished duty. But when a woman appears, she is so often a figure of mourning, carrying a loss that cannot be forgotten. La Llorona and the banshee, though born in very different places, are both embodiments of this truth. They remind us that grief does not belong to one land or one people. It is universal, an emotion so raw that humans everywhere have given it a voice, a face, and a story. When you hear of La Llorona wandering the rivers of Mexico and then hear of the banshee wailing over Irish hills, you realize that humanity has been listening to the same cry for centuries, only translated into different forms. And while La Llorona is feared for the harm she may bring, and the banshee respected for her solemn warning, both remain unforgettable because of their sound. Their cries pierce the silence of the night, pulling listeners into a moment where the boundary between worlds feels fragile. It is that cry, more than anything else, that makes them endure. For whether it announces death or mourns a tragedy already past, it speaks to something we all understand, the unshakable weight of loss. The image of the weeping spirit is also tied closely to landscapes, just as much as to people. La Llorona is rarely seen wandering through city streets. Instead, she belongs to riversides, lakes, and lonely paths where water flows quietly in the dark. The banshee, by contrast, is bound to the countryside of Ireland and Scotland, her cry rolling across hills and stone-walled fields. These connections to natural spaces give their legends an elemental weight. Water and wind become their allies, carrying their cries far beyond the human voice, making them seem as though the earth itself mourns with them. In both stories, the sound of the spirit is as important as the sights. You may never see La Llorona's pale figure by the water's edge, but if you hear her sobs drifting through the night, you know she is near. Likewise, the banshee is often invisible, her presence marked only by her keening lament. This detail matters because it shows how humans experience fear, not only through what they see, but through what they hear. A sound in the dark cannot be controlled or explained away as easily as a shadow in the corner of the eye. It enters the ear, lingers in the mind, and refuses to be silenced. That is the true power of these spirits. They do not simply haunt places, they haunt imaginations. Over time, the role of the banshee and La Llorona has blended into everyday life for the communities that tell their tales. In Ireland, families once believed that certain clans had their own personal banshee, a spirit who would announce deaths within their lineage. In Mexico and other parts of Latin America, La Llorona's story became a way for parents to protect children from wandering too far. Both spirits, in their own ways, became guardians of boundaries. The banshee marked the thin line between life and death, while La Llorona warned against the dangers that lurk beyond safe paths. It is also worth noting how their appearances differ. Even while their voices resonate with the same sorrow, La Llorona is often described as a young woman in a flowing white gown, her long black hair tangled and dripping with water. The banshee, meanwhile, shifts forms depending on who tells her story. Sometimes she is beautiful, her hair golden or red, her gown shining like moonlight. Other times she is ancient and wrinkled, her clothes dark and ragged. These variations reveal something important. The banshee is not one single figure, but an idea of grief given 1,000 different faces. La Llorona, too, has many forms, but the heart of her story always remains the same. She is the mother who lost her children and is doomed to cry for them forever. Both figures also highlight the way communities pass knowledge and warning through folklore. Instead of straightforward rules, people learn through stories. If you heard that the banshee was crying near your home, you prepared yourself for a death in the family. If you heard that La Llorona was roaming by the riverside, you stayed close to home and avoided the water. These tales were not just entertainment. They were protective nets, woven from words and belief shaping how people moved through the world. As cultures grew and mingled, these legends sometimes crossed paths. Modern storytellers, especially in literature and film, have drawn comparisons between the banshee and La Llorona, fascinated by how two spirits from opposite sides of the world could feel like distant cousins. Both women cry out for something that cannot be undone. Both are timeless, ageless, and unforgettable. It is as though grief in its deepest form will always find a voice, no matter where humans live. Even beyond these two famous figures, the theme repeats again and again. In Slavic folklore, there are rusalki, water maidens who linger by lakes and rivers, sometimes singing, sometimes weeping, often luring men to their doom. In Middle Eastern traditions, there are tales of jinn who cry with grief, their wails unsettling those who hear them. In Africa, some cultures tell of ghostly mothers who wander in search of lost children, their tears watering the earth as they pass. The parallels stretch across continents, reinforcing the idea that sorrow is a universal language, one that transcends borders and finds expression in ghostly form. What makes these weeping spirits so captivating is that they blur the line between comfort and terror. To some, the banshee's cry is a gift, giving families time to prepare for loss. To others, it is a curse, a sound no one wishes to hear. To some, La Llorona is a protective figure, keeping children safe from danger. To others, she is a threat, ready to pull the living into her eternal grief. These contradictions make the legends adaptable. Depending on how they are told, they can terrify, console, or caution. And perhaps that is why they endure, because human beings are drawn to stories that can shift meaning depending on how the listener needs to hear them. One of the most striking elements in comparing La Llorona with the banshee is the way each legend interacts with the passage of time. The banshee's cry, though terrifying, is tied to the natural rhythm of life and death. Her voice signals the inevitable, reminding listeners that mortality is part of the human journey. La Llorona's cry, on the other hand, resists time. It refuses to accept the natural order, repeating endlessly as though her grief froze the moment of her tragedy forever. While the banshee closes a chapter, La Llorona remains trapped in one that will never end. This contrast shows how different cultures process the concept of sorrow. For some, grief must be endured and accepted. For others, grief is an open wound that never heals, echoing for generations. Folklorists often point out that both figures reflect the landscapes that gave them birth, Ireland, with its misty hills, crumbling castles, and ancient burial mounds, created the banshee as a spirit woven into family and ancestral ties. Mexico and Latin America, with their deep rivers, sprawling villages, and layered histories of conquest and loss, shaped La Llorona into a wandering ghost whose story carries both personal tragedy and cultural memory. It is as if the land itself gave voice to these women, ensuring their cries would always be heard. We can also see how their cries serve different purposes. For the banshee, her wail is less about herself and more about the listener. It is a warning, a gift of knowledge, though wrapped in terror. For La Llorona, the wail is entirely her own, a sound of suffering that spills outward into the world. Anyone who hears her sobs becomes a witness to her pain. This difference is subtle, but important. One cry prepares you, the other envelops you. Both, however, are impossible to ignore. When looking beyond these two, the global pattern of weeping spirits grows clearer. In Greek mythology, there are the mournful lamii, female figures sometimes cursed to walk the earth in sorrow and hunger. Their cries were said to be chilling, echoing through the night, to remind humans of divine punishment and tragedy. In South America, beyond the story of La Llorona, there are other tales of women tied to rivers or lakes who weep for lost children, reflecting variations of the same motif across different regions. These similarities suggest that the image of a grieving, crying woman is one of humanity's most ancient archetypes. Across centuries, across continents, people have returned again and again to the sound of a woman's lament as a way to express loss that cannot be put into words. It is not only about fear, it is about memory, endurance, and the human need to give shape to the invisible weight of grief. Consider how communities respond to these figures. In Ireland, hearing the banshee once brought families together in prayer, preparing them to honor the one who would soon pass. In Mexico, hearing La Llorona's cry might bring children running back to their parents, clinging tighter to safety. In both cases, the cry serves as a social bond. It pulls people closer, reminding them of the fragility of life and the importance of family. Even as the stories terrify, they also guide and protect. Over time, both spirits have crossed into popular culture, shaping how people worldwide imagine the supernatural. The banshee has appeared in countless poems, songs, and modern stories, always with that haunting cry that precedes death. La Llorona, meanwhile, has become a central figure in films, books, and plays, often used as a symbol of grief, revenge, or the consequences of betrayal. These appearances keep the legends alive, but they also transform them. With each retelling, the spirit shifts slightly, adapting to the fears and needs of a new generation. What never changes, however, is the central image, the weeping woman. Whether she is by a riverbank or standing on a windswept hill, whether she warns of death or mourns her own loss, her presence is unmistakable. She is the embodiment of sorrow itself, given a voice so that we cannot forget it. She forces us to stop, to listen, to acknowledge that some pains do not fade. And perhaps that is why she continues to follow us into the modern age. In a world filled with noise, her cry cuts through with clarity. It is simple, primal, and unforgettable. When people hear stories of La Llorona or the banshee, they might not remember every detail of the legend, but they always remember the sound, the wail that rises in the night and sinks into the heart. It is the sound of grief made eternal, echoing across time and place, linking humanity in a shared understanding of loss. As we drift deeper into this exploration, it becomes clear that these parallels are not coincidences. They are reflections of something that has always been with us. The knowledge that life is fragile, that loss is inevitable, and that sorrow will always find a way to make itself known. Whether it comes as a banshee's keen or La Llorona's sobs, the weeping spirit is humanity's way of giving voice to the silence left behind by death. These echoes across cultures reveal that grief is never an isolated experience. Just as rivers connect distant places, the figure of the weeping spirit connects distant peoples. In Ireland, a banshee's lament drifts over green hills and stone cottages. In Mexico, La Llorona's sobs float over dark rivers and quiet villages. In Japan, an onryo's cry slips through paper walls in a moonlit house. Each voice is distinct, but together they create a chorus of sorrow that humanity has carried for centuries. It is worth reflecting on why these spirits have such lasting power. Part of it is fear, of course. The banshee's cry announcing death, La Llorona's sob threatening danger, the White Lady's tears signaling doom. But beyond fear, there is recognition. Listeners hear something they already know in those cries, something familiar. They hear the sound of mourning, the same sound humans have made for as long as we have lived and lost. These spirits give shape to emotions too deep to name, turning grief into a presence that walks beside us, even after death. The power of these figures also lies in their ambiguity. The banshee is not truly evil. She does not cause death, only announces it. La Llorona may be terrifying, but she is also pitiful, trapped in grief she can't escape. The White Lady may frighten travelers, but often her story is one of betrayal and heartbreak. These spirits are not simple villains. They exist in the shadowy space between horror and sympathy, where fear and compassion intertwine. That complexity makes them unforgettable. They are not just monsters to be avoided, but reminders of the humanity within every ghost story. When modern audiences encounter these legends, they often find themselves torn between dread and sorrow. In films, for instance, La Llorona might be portrayed with glowing eyes and chilling cries, yet her backstory inevitably draws sympathy. She is frightening because she is tragic. The banshee, too, often appears in popular media as a fearsome wraith, yet folklore insists she is a mourner, not a killer. These layers ensure that their stories never lose relevance. Each retelling allows us to explore the balance between fear of the supernatural and empathy for human suffering. Even in everyday life, the influence of these weeping women lingers. Parents warn children not to stray too far from home, invoking La Llorona as a reason to stay safe. Families in Ireland once listened for the banshee's cry as a sign to gather together in prayer. Folklore is more than entertainment. It becomes woven into the choices people make, shaping behavior in subtle but powerful ways. The weeping spirit, then, is both legend and guide, shaping how we live even as she reminds us of death. Another layer of connection is the role of women's voices themselves. Across history, women have often been the ones to keen at funerals, to sing laments, to carry the sound of mourning for their families and communities. The banshee's wail may have been inspired by the ancient tradition of Irish women who performed keening at burials. La Llorona's cries may echo the real voices of mothers grieving lost children, voices that would not be forgotten. In this sense, the weeping spirits are not inventions, but extensions of a very real human practice, the sound of women carrying grief for everyone to hear. These traditions remind us that crying itself is a form of memory. A tear shed for someone gone is not just an expression of sorrow, but a way of keeping them alive in our hearts. The weeping woman, whether banshee or La Llorona, magnifies that truth. She cries endlessly, making sure we do not forget the pain of loss, the fragility of love, the cost of betrayal. Her tears become eternal, flowing not only in rivers or across hills, but through the collective memory of every culture that tells her story. As we step back, we see a larger picture. The banshee of Ireland, the La Llorona of Latin America, the onryo of Japan, the white lady of the Philippines, and countless others, all of them are part of a single human story. They are the embodiment of grief that could not be silenced, sorrow that demanded a voice so strong it crossed into the supernatural. They remind us that no matter where we are from, loss shapes us in similar ways. Fear of death, regret for mistakes, longing for what cannot return. These are experiences every culture understands, and so every culture has given them a ghost to carry their weight. And so, as night deepens and the world grows still, the image of these weeping spirits lingers. Their cries weave together across oceans and centuries, a mournful chorus that refuses to fade. They frighten us, yes, but they also comfort us, reminding us that grief is universal, that sorrow binds us as much as joy does. The banshees wail, La Llorona's sob, the whispers of other weeping women. Each one is a reminder that the living and the dead are not as far apart as we imagine. As our journey continues, we will turn from these parallels toward the deeper question of why such stories endure. What is it about the cry of a weeping woman that humanity cannot let go? In the next part of our tale, we will explore how these legends reflect not only loss and fear, but also resilience, culture, and the way humans give meaning to tragedy. Today, La Llorona is no longer confined to riversides, dark alleyways, or whispered warnings shared in candlelit rooms. She has become a cultural icon, stretching her sorrowful voice far beyond the villages and towns of Latin America. In this segment, we'll explore how the legend of La Llorona lives on in the modern world, from movies and literature to festivals, social media, and even personal testimonies that remind us her spirit may still wander the night. One of the most fascinating aspects of La Llorona is how she has adapted over time. Despite being a centuries-old tale, her story has not faded. Instead, it continues to evolve and resurface in forms that appeal to each new generation. For many, she remains a frightening bedtime story used to teach children lessons about obedience or safety. Parents might say, "Don't go near the river at night, or La Llorona will take you," the same way earlier generations once did. But beyond being a cautionary tale, La Llorona has taken on new life as a symbol of cultural identity, resilience, and mystery. Take, for example, the world of cinema. Over the past century, La Llorona has made her way into dozens of films, particularly in Mexican and Latin American horror. In 1933, one of the earliest horror films from Mexico, simply titled La Llorona, brought her to the silver screen. Since then, directors have reimagined her countless times. Some portray her as a demonic entity, others as a tragic, misunderstood soul searching endlessly for her lost children. Even Hollywood has taken an interest. The 2019 film, The Curse of La Llorona, part of the Conjuring universe, introduced her story to global audiences, though many Latin American viewers critiqued it for straying too far from the original roots of the legend. Whether terrifying or sympathetic, her presence in film proves that the weeping woman continues to haunt our imaginations. But movies are only one piece of her modern presence. La Llorona has also become a recurring character in literature. Writers across Latin America and the United States often weave her into novels, poems, and short stories. Sometimes she is the central figure of a horror narrative. Other times she is used symbolically, representing grief, betrayal, or the pain of mothers who have been wronged by the world. In this way, La Llorona has become more than a ghost story. She has become a metaphor for universal human emotions. Her voice echoes in music, too. In some traditional Mexican folk songs, La Llorona is depicted as both terrifying and heartbreakingly beautiful. The haunting song, simply titled La Llorona, has been performed by countless artists, from Chavela Vargas to Lila Downs, each rendition carrying that same mournful energy. In these songs, she is not just a ghost, but a figure of eternal sorrow. Her voice captured not only in riverside wails, but in melodies that cut deep into the soul. The music often blurs the line between fear and empathy, reminding listeners that the story of La Llorona is not only about terror, but also about grief and longing. In today's digital age, La Llorona has also found her place on the internet. Platforms like TikTok and YouTube are filled with short videos and personal stories of alleged encounters. Some claim to hear her cries in the dead of night, caught faintly on recordings. Others share dramatized retellings, turning her legend into viral content. Young people across Latin America and beyond recreate her image through cosplay, horror challenges, and animated shorts, keeping her alive in the ever-changing landscape of online storytelling. Just like older generations once whispered about her around a fire, today's youth share her legend through screens that light up in the dark. Festivals and cultural events also keep her memory alive. In Mexico and other parts of Latin America, Dia de los Muertos celebrations sometimes include theatrical performances or parades featuring La Llorona. Dressed in flowing white gowns, actresses emerge from behind candles and incense, reenacting her cries along riverbanks or in town plazas. These performances blur the line between theater and folklore, making the audience feel as though they are face-to-face with the wandering spirit herself. For many, it is both a form of entertainment and a way to connect with their ancestral heritage, ensuring the legend remains tied to identity and tradition. Yet beyond entertainment and culture, there are those who swear La Llorona is not just a story. Police officers, taxi drivers, and late-night travelers across Latin America still share testimonies of strange encounters. A driver might recall hearing a woman sobbing on a deserted road, only to find no one there. A family might speak of seeing a pale woman in a white standing by a river, her figure vanishing when they approach. Whether these are genuine supernatural experiences or the powerful effect of centuries of storytelling, they continue to give La Llorona her chilling relevance. As the modern world changes, La Llorona remains adaptable. She is both a ghost and a cultural emblem, both a warning and a reminder of sorrow. Her ability to survive centuries of retelling shows that she is more than a fading myth. She has become a living part of folklore, one that continues to breathe new life with every generation that speaks her name. And so La Llorona's weeping no longer belongs to the shadows of riversides alone. It resonates in films, in songs, on festival stages, in hushed conversations, and in the glowing light of phone screens. The question that lingers is not whether her story will survive, but rather how it will continue to evolve in the years to come. One of the most striking things about La Llorona in modern times is the way she has crossed borders. Though she was born from Latin American folklore, her story has spread throughout the United States and other parts of the world, often carried by migrant communities who bring their traditions with them. In states like Texas, New Mexico, and California, La Llorona is as well known as she is in Mexico. Children who grow up in bilingual households may first hear about her in Spanish from their grandparents, only to later find her in English-language books and films. In this way, La Llorona has become a bridge between cultures, linking the old world with the new. In fact, many communities in the United States host their own local versions of La Llorona. Near the San Antonio River in Texas, there are stories of a weeping woman who prowls the banks at night. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, families pass down warnings of La Llorona to keep children from wandering too far from home. These versions are not simply copies of the Mexican legend. They are living retellings, shaped by new landscapes and experiences. The spirit becomes a local guardian of caution, adapting seamlessly to her surroundings. Her influence even appears in classrooms and universities. Scholars and students often study La Llorona as a lens through which to understand the blending of indigenous, Spanish, and modern influences in Latin American culture. In this way, she becomes more than a ghost story. She is a symbol of cultural history, a figure that reflects the struggles and sorrows of generations. Some researchers argue that she represents the pain of colonization, the loss of indigenous identity, and the role of women in societies shaped by conquest and change. Others see her as a figure of resistance, her voice crying out against injustice across centuries. At the same time, La Llorona remains deeply personal. For many, she is not an abstract academic symbol, but a living presence. A young child in Mexico might still be tucked into bed with the warning that La Llorona will come if they misbehave. A teenager in Los Angeles might find themselves scrolling through spooky TikToks about La Llorona before turning off the lights at night. For these individuals, her story is not just folklore. It is a living, breathing part of their daily lives, shaping their fears and imaginations. Modern storytellers continue to explore her in creative ways. Graphic novels have given her haunting new faces, sometimes portraying her as a skeletal figure, other times as a tragic ghost with tears of blood. Television shows reference her in episodes where characters must face supernatural dangers. Podcasts dedicated to horror frequently feature her legend, retold with modern twists that keep audiences hooked. Each retelling may vary in detail, but they all preserve the essence of her sorrowful wail. Interestingly, La Llorona has also become a figure of empowerment in some modern contexts. Feminist reinterpretations of the legend paint her not as a villain, but as a woman crushed by the weight of betrayal and societal expectations. Instead of condemning her for her actions, these retellings highlight the injustices she endured. Some even suggest that her haunting presence reflects the silenced grief of countless women whose voices were ignored throughout history. In this way, La Llorona becomes not just a ghost, but a symbol of resilience and recognition. Her imagery has also found its way into art and fashion. Murals across cities like Mexico City and Los Angeles feature striking depictions of the weeping woman, her long gown flowing into rivers of tears or transforming into skeletal forms that remind viewers of mortality. Clothing and jewelry inspired by her story are sold during Dia de los Muertos, where her face becomes part of the celebration of memory and heritage. Even in these modern expressions, she remains haunting, beautiful, and unforgettable. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of La Llorona in today's world is how often she is still seen and heard. Paranormal investigators, urban explorers, and ordinary people share recordings of mysterious wails echoing across riversides or empty streets at night. Some claim these sounds are owls or the wind, but others insist that there is no mistaking the mournful cries of La Llorona. Ghost hunting groups regularly include her in their lists of most feared apparitions, placing her alongside global legends like Bloody Mary or the White Lady of Europe. Her modern survival proves something powerful about folklore. While technology, globalization, and fast-paced living might erase some traditions, others remain stubbornly alive. La Llorona has not faded in the glow of screens. She has adapted to them, moving from fireside stories to television, from village warnings to viral videos. Her sorrow has become timeless, echoing just as loudly in the modern city as it once did in the quiet countryside. She is no longer just a tale told by worried parents or elders. She has become a multi-dimensional figure who exists in entertainment, academia, art, and real-life testimonies. Yet at the heart of it all, she is still the same. A woman in white, wandering endlessly, her cry is carried by the wind, a reminder of loss, sorrow, and the mysteries that cling to the human spirit. One fascinating part of La Llorona's survival in modern times is her presence in film and television. From early black and white Mexican horror films of the 1930s to modern Hollywood productions, she has been given many faces. Sometimes she is portrayed as a terrifying monster with glowing eyes and bone-chilling screams. Other times, she is depicted as a tragic figure, her sorrow evoking sympathy rather than fear. This duality captures the tension at the heart of her legend. Audiences cannot decide whether to recoil from her or to pity her. The camera lingers on her tears just as much as her haunting silhouette, reminding us that she is both victim and villain. The 2019 film The Curse of La Llorona brought her into mainstream American horror, but for many, it was only a pale shadow of the true folklore. Critics noted that the story stripped away some of her cultural depth, turning her into a generic horror figure. Yet even so, the movie reawakened global interest, introducing her to viewers who may have never heard her name before. Beyond Hollywood, countless independent film, student projects, and regional television shows continue to reinterpret her legend, each adding a layer of modern imagination to a centuries-old tale. Social media has also become one of her most powerful new homes. On platforms like TikTok and YouTube, people share short clips of supposed encounters with La Llorona, or creative retellings of her story with chilling sound effects and glowing eyes in the darkness. Some of these videos are clearly staged, while others leave audiences unsettled, unsure of whether the cries heard in the background were fabricated or captured by chance. The comments on these posts often reveal something deeper. People sharing their own family stories about seeing or hearing La Llorona, connecting across borders and generations through shared experiences of the supernatural. In literature, she's been embraced by poets and novelists alike. Writers weave her presence into stories about migration, identity, and belonging. In some works, she becomes a metaphor for the pain of displacement, her endless search for her children, mirroring the struggles of families separated by borders. In others, she becomes a voice for women silenced by history, her wails echoing across the pages as a reminder that sorrow does not die but lingers. Her adaptability to these themes demonstrates how powerful her imagery remains in the modern imagination. Even in communities where belief in ghosts has faded, La Llorona remains a symbol of shared heritage. Festivals and cultural events often include her among the processions, her likeness carried in costumes and performances. During Dia de los Muertos, families sometimes tell her story alongside those of their own ancestors, blending personal memory with the greater mythology of death and remembrance. In these spaces, she becomes not only a frightening ghost, but also a cultural anchor, a reminder of identity and belonging. The persistence of sightings and personal encounters with La Llorona also gives her a living presence. Paranormal groups often organize night vigils along rivers and lakes in Mexico, the American Southwest, and even Central America, listening for her weeping cries. Witnesses describe feeling sudden chills, hearing sobs that seem to come from nowhere, or seeing a shadowy figure drifting along the water's edge. In many cases, these experiences leave people shaken, even if they cannot prove what they saw or heard. The uncertainty itself is part of her power. When people retell these stories, they become part of the ongoing legend, each sighting weaving into the larger tapestry of belief. Interestingly, psychologists and folklorists often study La Llorona to understand why she endures. Some argue that her story taps into primal human fears, the fear of losing a child, the fear of drowning, the fear of wandering alone in the dark. Others point to the emotional resonance of grief, which is universal and eternal. Because La Llorona embodies sorrow so fully, she becomes a mirror for anyone who has experienced loss. Whether or not one believes in her physical existence, the emotions she represents are undeniable. Modern retellings also highlight the role of women's voices in folklore. La Llorona is not a silent ghost, but one who cries out, her grief too strong to contain. In patriarchal societies, where women's voices were often suppressed, the legend of La Llorona stands out. Her wailing is unstoppable. It disturbs the night, interrupts daily life, and demands to be acknowledged. In this sense, she has become a figure of both fear and defiance. For some, she is terrifying because she cannot be silenced. For others, she is powerful for exactly the same reason. Her enduring influence even touches the way people experience landscapes. A quiet river at night, the whisper of wind through trees, or the distant cry of an animal can all become reminders of La Llorona. She transforms ordinary places into sites of mystery, ensuring that the world never feels entirely mundane. This ability to turn the familiar into the uncanny is part of why she has lasted for so long. In her presence, the night always feels alive, charged with possibility and heavy with the weight of sorrow. In the modern world, where so much changes quickly, La Llorona's persistence feels almost comforting in its constancy. She is still there, her cries carried on the wind, reminding us that stories never truly die. They adapt, they shift, and they find new voices to keep them alive. She belongs to the past, but she also belongs to the present, and likely she will belong to the future as well. La Llorona's presence today also reveals the way legends become living bridges between generations. An elder might tell the story by candlelight, recalling how their own parents used it to keep them safe at night. A younger person might discover her through a horror movie trailer or a social media post. Though the entry points differ, both are drawn into the same current of memory and imagination. The legend becomes a shared thread, tying together people who might otherwise live in very different worlds. In this way, La Llorona shows us how folklore can evolve without ever losing its root. Some modern interpretations even place her in entirely new contexts, blending her sorrowful image with contemporary fears. In urban legends from certain neighborhoods, she is said to haunt highways or empty streets, her cries carried over the roar of passing cars. Others whisper of her appearing near apartment complexes where tragedies have taken place, her wails echoing between walls like an ancient warning in a modern setting. These retellings do not erase her connection to rivers and lakes, but expand her reach, proving that she can belong to any landscape where grief has left its mark. Technology has also given her legend new life in ways that earlier generations could not imagine. Podcasts about true crime and the paranormal often dedicate entire episodes to her, mixing folklore with eyewitness accounts. Virtual reality experiences and horror video games have placed players face to face with La Llorona, her shadowy figure gliding closer as her sobs grow louder. Even augmented reality apps have been designed to simulate her haunting, blending digital illusion with physical spaces. What was once confined to whispered warnings now flows into every corner of digital storytelling. And yet, despite these transformations, her essence remains unchanged. She is still the weeping mother, cursed to wander endlessly. She still carries the weight of choices made and lives lost. She still unsettles the human heart in ways no other ghostly figure quite manages to. The fact that she can survive translation into film, social media, art, or scholarship without losing that core identity speaks to the raw power of her image. It is also striking how La Llorona continues to be invoked in moments of real-world grief. In times of tragedy, whether personal or communal, her story sometimes surfaces as a metaphor for collective mourning. Poets write of her as the mother of all who have been lost, her cries merging with the tears of those who mourn today. Activists, too, have used her image to represent the suffering of mothers whose children disappeared due to violence or migration. In these interpretations, she is no longer just a figure from the past, but a voice, crying alongside the present. Children still whisper about her at sleepovers, daring one another to say her name in the dark. Families still warn their little ones not to wander near dangerous waters. Travelers still report hearing wails where none should be. These quiet rituals prove that La Llorona has not simply survived. She thrives, re-emerging wherever human imagination finds room for her. She is as present in the buzzing lights of a city as she is under the quiet stars of the countryside. Some may argue that the age of folklore is fading, that old stories cannot compete with the speed and scale of modern entertainment. But La Llorona proves otherwise. Her legend shows that humans still hunger for stories that connect them to mystery, to sorrow, and to the unseen. No matter how fast the world spins, people still pause at night when they hear something strange outside. They still wonder whether it is only the wind or something older, something that has been crying for centuries. In the end, La Llorona in the modern world is a reminder of two truths, that grief is timeless and that stories have the power to outlast us all. Her cries have carried through riversides, through villages, through cities, and now through screens. Each retelling gives her another century of life. Each listener ensures her sorrow is remembered. Whether she is seen as a warning, a monster, a victim, or a symbol she endures, her sobs folding into the very fabric of human memory. And perhaps that is her greatest gift to us. La Llorona teaches that even in a world filled with noise, certain voices can never be silenced. Her cry rises above the rush of rivers, the hum of highways, and the buzz of phones. It is the sound of sorrow eternal, a reminder that some stories are too powerful to fade. She walks beside us still, a ghost of the past, woven firmly into the present, her tears shining like stars reflected in dark water.